Life is like a game of high-stakes poker. One wrong move, and you lose it all, but one bold play and everything changes. Imagine walking into a car dealership only to get kicked out, humiliated, and told you don't belong. But here's the twist: the man they insulted was holding the winning hand all along, because he was the new owner. Get out of here. This place isn't for you. Those were the first words Marcus heard when he stepped into the luxury car dealership. The sharp tone cut through the glossy showroom air, filled with the scent of new leather and polished chrome. Heads turned instantly, some in surprise, others in quiet discomfort. Marcus froze for a moment, not because he was scared, but because he was stunned at the rudeness of the greeting. He had expected excitement, maybe curiosity, but never hostility. He was dressed in a simple navy polo shirt, dark jeans, and worn sneakers. Nothing fancy, nothing flashy. To him, walking into a dealership shouldn't require a suit or a designer watch, but the manager, Rick, clearly saw things differently. Rick's eyes narrowed as he scanned Marcus from head to toe. He crossed his arms and let out a dismissive laugh. "We don't need people like you wasting our time." "These cars," he said, waving his hand dramatically toward the shiny sports cars under the bright showroom lights, "are not cheap. You can't afford them, so leave before I call security." The words stung, but not because Marcus cared what Rick thought of him. Marcus had faced judgment his whole life: teachers who doubted him, bosses who overlooked him, people who sized him up just by his skin color or the clothes he wore. But this moment was different. He wasn't just a curious customer or someone browsing with no intention of buying. He was the new owner of the dealership. And yet, here he was, being told to leave his own business. The room grew tense. Staff members shifted in place, clearly aware Rick had crossed a line but too afraid to challenge him. Customers glanced back and forth between the two men, whispering under their breath. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. Marcus stayed calm. His posture was steady, his voice low but firm. He didn't raise his tone or lash out. He simply asked one question: "Are you sure you want me to leave?" The words carried weight, though Rick didn't recognize it. Instead of thinking, he smirked with arrogance, convinced of his authority. "Yes, I'm sure. Now, get out." "Don't make me repeat myself." Marcus studied him for a long moment. He could feel every eye in the showroom locked on him, waiting. For his reaction, instead of arguing, he gave a small nod. "All right then," he said quietly. Before turning and walking toward the door, Rick puffed out his chest like he had won some sort of victory. Under his breath, he muttered, "Some people just don't know their place." What Rick didn't know was that Marcus Johnson wasn't just some people. Marcus had worked his way up from nothing. He started in real estate, buying small, rundown houses and slowly turning them into profit. Year after year, he expanded until his company grew into a multi-million-dollar business. He became known for being sharp, determined, and uncheckable. He had everything he wanted except one thing: a piece of the car industry. Cars had been his passion since childhood, and owning a dealership had always been one of his dreams. So, when the chance came to buy this very dealership, he didn't hesitate. He signed the papers just a week ago. The ink was barely dry. And the reason he showed up in simple clothes was to see for himself how customers were treated. He wanted to know the truth before officially stepping in as the new owner. What he found left him both disappointed and determined. As Marcus pushed open the glass doors and stepped outside, silence filled the room behind him. Some employees whispered nervously, sensing something wasn't right. A few glanced at each other with uneasy expressions, as if they knew Rick had made a mistake. But Rick strutted proudly, convinced he had done the right thing. He even turned to a young salesperson and said loudly, "See? That's how you deal with people who can't afford to be here. Time is money, and I don't waste mine." The young employee forced a smile, but inside he felt uneasy. Something about Marcus's calmness, the quiet strength in his question, didn't feel like the reaction of a man who had just been humiliated. It felt like the calm before a storm, because Marcus wasn't walking away in defeat. He wasn't leaving because Rick had the final word. He was leaving because tomorrow morning, when the entire staff gathered for their meeting, he would return. And when he did, the truth would be revealed. The same man Rick had kicked out, the same man he had insulted, the same man he thought was a waste of time, was the one signing his paycheck, and when that moment came, Rick's entire world would be turned upside down. Rick had worked at the dealership for nearly 15 years. In the beginning, he was a young, hungry salesman, eager to please, always chasing a commission. But with time and a few promotions, his attitude shifted. He began to think of himself as untouchable, the king of the showroom floor. He had developed an arrogance that hung around him like a cloud, and he carried himself as if the dealership belonged to him. Every customer that walked through the glass doors was judged within seconds. Rick's eyes scanned them like a scanner. At an airport, calculating their worth based on their clothes, their watch, their posture, and yes, their skin color. If you wore a sharp suit and drove up in a luxury car, Rick rolled out the red carpet. But if you walked in casually dressed, if you didn't fit his shallow idea of wealth, he dismissed you instantly. To him, he was never wrong about people. He believed he could spot who had money and who didn't from a mile away. So when Marcus stepped in that day, wearing nothing but a simple polo shirt and jeans, Rick didn't even see him as a customer. He didn't see a man who might be browsing or maybe even planning a big purchase. All Rick saw was someone who didn't belong. He saw someone who, in his mind, was wasting time. Rick had no idea that Marcus was not only wealthy, but that he had built his fortune with his own two hands. Marcus wasn't born into money. He had started small, flipping one house at a time, grinding through late nights and early mornings, taking risks most people would never dare to take. Brick by brick, deal by deal, he grew his business into a real estate empire. His story wasn't one of luck, it was one of determination, sacrifice, and vision. And now, after years of success, Marcus wanted to chase another dream. He loved cars ever since he was a boy. He would sit for hours sketching his dream vehicles, reading car magazines, and imagining himself behind the wheel of something powerful and beautiful. For him, cars were more than machines. They were symbols of freedom and achievement. So, when the opportunity came to invest in the automotive industry, he didn't hesitate. He had purchased several dealerships as part of his new business expansion, and this particular dealership, the one Rick strutted around in as if he owned it, was now his. But Rick didn't know. As Rick barked orders across the showroom, his voice dripping with condescension, Marcus quietly walked out of the building. He didn't shout. He didn't throw his wealth in Rick's face. He didn't even bother to correct him. Marcus believed moments like this revealed more about a person's character than anything else could. Still, as he stepped into the fresh air outside, Marcus knew one thing for certain: things were about to change. Inside, Rick continued bragging to his staff, laughing about how he had handled the situation. "You have to know how to filter out the time wasters," he told a young salesman. "That guy wasn't here to buy anything. You can tell by the way he dresses, the way he walks. You can't let people like that waste our time. This is a premium dealership. We're not running a charity here." The young salesman forced a nod, but in his gut, he felt uncomfortable. Something about the calm way Marcus had responded didn't match Rick's story. Marcus hadn't looked like a man embarrassed or defeated. He had looked like a man in control, as if he knew something no one else did. And that was true. Marcus knew the ink on the contract was barely dry. The dealership already belonged to him. Every car in the showroom, every desk, every sale, every paycheck, even Rick's position, was under his authority now, but Marcus wasn't rushing to reveal the truth. He wanted to wait for the right moment to see how far Rick's arrogance would go. At home that night, Marcus sat in his office, overlooking the city skyline. Papers were spread across his desk, the official documents of the purchase, the ownership transfer, the plans he had for the dealership. He leaned back in his chair, replaying the scene in his mind. Rick's sneer, the dismissal, the way he had spoken down to him, certain that he was above him. Marcus wasn't angry. He had dealt with people like Rick before. But he was determined. The next time he walked into that dealership, things would not be the same. The employees would learn what kind of leadership they would now work under. Customers would no longer be judged at the door. And Rick, the self-proclaimed king of the showroom, would finally learn that arrogance comes at a price. Marcus smiled faintly as he closed the folder on his desk. Tomorrow morning, the staff meeting would be called, and the truth would come out. The man Rick had insulted, humiliated, and forced out of the showroom was the man who now held the keys to the entire business, and when that moment came, Marcus knew the shock on Rick's face would be worth every second of silence he had kept today. Because sometimes the sweetest victory isn't in arguing or proving someone wrong in the moment, it's in letting them reveal their own ignorance, and then watching the truth turn their world upside down the next morning. The dealership employees gathered in the main showroom for a mandatory meeting. It wasn't unusual for meetings to happen, but this one felt different. Whispers floated across the room. Something big was happening. Word had spread like wildfire the night before that the dealership had been sold to a new owner. Nobody knew the details. Some thought a giant corporation had taken over. Others believed it was an investor from out of state. Nobody imagined the truth. Rick, as always, was standing tall at the front. His tie was perfect, his suit pressed, his chin lifted. With arrogance. He loved being in charge, and he was convinced the new owner would recognize his importance immediately. With a smirk, he bragged to a group of employees standing nearby. "Whoever this owner is, I'll make sure they know I run this place. 15 years of experience doesn't go unnoticed. Trust me, I'll be their right-hand man." Some of the employees nodded politely, but they weren't so sure. Rick's reputation was well known: rude to customers, harsh on staff, and always more concerned with his own ego than the company. But in Rick's mind, he was untouchable. Suddenly, the sound of the showroom doors opening cut through the low chatter. Everyone turned. Marcus walked in, but this time he wasn't wearing a polo and jeans. He wasn't dressed like the casual man Rick had kicked out the day before. Today, he was in a sharp, tailored suit, polished shoes, and a confident stride that commanded attention. The room fell silent. The air grew heavy. Some employees instantly recognized him. Their eyes widened, their jaws dropped. They whispered to each other in disbelief. Was this really happening? Was this the same man from yesterday? Rick's smirk began to fade, but he still didn't understand. To him, Marcus was just an unwelcome face from the day before. He muttered under his breath, "What's he doing here?" Marcus walked calmly to the front, taking his time. His eyes scanned the room, pausing briefly on Rick before he turned to address everyone. His voice was steady, calm, but full of authority. "Good morning, everyone," he began. "I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Marcus Johnson, and as of last week, I am the new owner of this dealership." The room erupted in gasps. Some employees exchanged stunned looks. Others clapped quietly out of relief. Rick, however, went completely pale. His mouth dropped open, his confident stance melting into shock. He blinked, as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. It couldn't be. It just couldn't. The same man he had thrown out yesterday was now his boss. Rick stammered, Wait, you're the new owner?" Marcus looked at him directly, his expression calm but unshakable. "Yes, Rick, I am. And I was here yesterday to see how customers are treated in this dealership. Unfortunately, what I saw was unacceptable." The room was dead silent. Nobody dared to move, Marcus continued, his tone never rising, but his words striking like thunder. "When I walked in, I wasn't welcomed, I wasn't offered help, I wasn't even treated with basic respect. Instead, I was insulted, humiliated, and told I didn't belong, all because of how I looked. That isn't how a business should run. That isn't how people should be treated." Rick swallowed hard, sweat forming on his forehead. I didn't know who you were," he said, quickly. "If I had known, Marcus raised his hand, cutting him off. "That's the problem. You assumed. You judged. You thought you could tell someone's worth just by their clothes or the color of their skin. You didn't see a customer. You didn't see a person. You saw what you wanted to see, and you acted on arrogance." Every employee in the room stared at Rick. For the first time in years, he looked small, powerless, and exposed. Marcus let the silence hang for a moment before continuing. This dealership will not be built on arrogance. It will not be a place where customers are judged before they even speak. From this day forward, this will be a place of respect. Every person who walks through those doors deserves kindness and fairness, whether they're buying the most expensive car or just looking. He turned to Rick, and as for you? After yesterday, it's clear you don't belong here. You've had years to set an example for this team, but instead, you've built a culture of arrogance and disrespect. That ends today. Rick's eyes widened in panic. Wait, please, I've given my whole life to this place. You can't just fire me. I was only trying to protect the business. Give me one more chance. Marcus shook his head slowly. You weren't protecting the business. Rick, you were destroying its reputation. And I won't let that continue. You're finished here. The security team, already anticipating the order, stepped forward. Rick looked around the room desperately, but nobody defended him. The employees who had once tolerated his bullying now sat quietly, some even relieved to see him go. As Rick was escorted out, Marcus turned back to the staff. This is a new beginning. I expect respect, honesty, and fairness in this dealership. Treat every customer like they matter. They do. If we work together, this place will not only succeed, but it will become a place people trust. The room filled with quiet applause, growing louder as the staff realized they finally had a leader who cared about more than just sales numbers. Marcus stood tall, looking around at his new team. He had turned a moment of humiliation into a lesson, and he knew this was only the beginning. The man who had been kicked out was now in charge, and the dealership's future had changed forever. Marcus looked around the room. His eyes moved from one face to another, employees who were sitting stiffly in their chairs, some with nervous expressions, others with shame written across their faces. He spoke not with anger, not with shouting, but with a voice that carried authority and purpose. Yesterday, he began slowly, I came here dressed like any regular person. I didn't come in with a suit or expensive shoes or anything that screamed wealth. I didn't want to be treated as a businessman or a rich man. I wanted to be treated simply as a customer. I wanted to see how people who walk through those doors are welcomed. He paused, letting his words sink in. Sadly, what I saw disappointed me. The room was dead silent. Some employees lowered their eyes, unable to look at him. A few stole nervous glances at Rick, who was frozen in place, his once confident posture now shrinking. Marcus shifted his gaze directly onto Rick. The weight of his stare made Rick squirm. One of your managers, Marcus said firmly, insulted me. He humiliated me. He judged me based only on how I looked. He didn't see me as a person or even as a potential customer. He saw me as someone who didn't belong. That's not how you treat people. Not here, not in my dealership. Rick's lips trembled as he tried to speak. His voice cracked. I didn't know who you were. I thought. Marcus raised his hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. His tone sharpened, though still controlled. That's exactly the problem, Rick. You thought, you assumed, you judged a book by its cover, and in doing so, you didn't just disrespect me, you disrespected this business. You disrespected the values this company should stand for. And worse, you disrespected every customer who has ever been treated the same way. The room grew heavier. A pin drop could have been heard. The employees were holding their breath, most of them in disbelief at the sight of Rick, the man who barked orders, the man who bullied them for years, completely speechless. They had never seen him quiet, never seen him unable to talk his way out of something. Marcus continued, his voice steady and clear. This dealership will not run on arrogance. It will not run on racism. It will not run on judgment or discrimination. That is not how we do business. From this day forward, this dealership will run on respect, honesty, and fairness. Every single customer who walks through those doors deserves kindness, no matter what they look like, no matter how they dress, no matter where they come from. That is how we build trust. That is how we build success. Some of the employees nodded quietly, relief washing over their faces. For years they had seen Rick turn away customers, laugh at them behind their backs, or treat them with open contempt. And for years nobody had spoken up. too afraid of losing their jobs. But now, for the first time, someone was saying the words they had all wanted to hear. Marcus walked slowly across the front of the room, his hands clasped behind his back. His voice softened, but the conviction in it grew stronger. I built my business from the ground up. I started with nothing. I know what it feels like to be underestimated. I know what it feels like to be told you don't belong. But I never let that stop me, and I will never allow that attitude to define this dealership. This place will be different. This place will welcome people. This place will treat every customer with dignity, because respect costs nothing, but it means everything. The employees shifted in their seats, moved by his words. Some even felt a surge of pride, imagining what the dealership could become under his leadership. Rick finally tried again, his voice weak, almost pleading. "Mr. Johnson, I was only trying to protect the business. I thought you were wasting our time. I didn't mean—" Marcus stopped walking and looked at him again. His expression was calm but unyielding. "Rick, protecting the business doesn't mean chasing away customers. It doesn't mean humiliating people. Protecting the business means protecting its reputation, protecting its values, protecting the way it makes people feel when they walk inside. And yesterday you failed to do that. Not only did you insult me, you set the worst example possible. For your staff, that cannot continue." Rick's face was red now, sweat beading on his forehead. He tried to find words, but none came out. For the first time in years, he realized he had no power, no authority. The man he had looked down on, the man he had dismissed as not belonging, now stood in complete control of everything. Marcus turned back to the employees one final time. "This dealership is not just about selling cars. It's about people. And if we treat people right, success will follow. That is the culture we will build here, and anyone who can't follow that has no place in this company." The room stayed quiet, but the silence was no longer tense. It was respectful. Everyone knew they had just witnessed a turning point, not just for the dealership, but for themselves. And deep down, many of them felt something they hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Finally, Marcus turned back to Rick. The room had gone so silent that everyone could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner. All eyes were on Marcus, waiting for his decision. Rick's face was pale, his confident smirk long gone. "Rick," Marcus said firmly, his voice carrying across the room, "you've been here for a long time. I know that. You probably think your years here make you untouchable. But your behavior yesterday proved to me that you don't belong in this company anymore. As of today, you're fired." The words landed like a hammer. Rick's jaw dropped. He stumbled a step back, as if someone had punched him in the chest. "What? No, you can't do that," he stammered. His voice was trembling now, desperate. "Please, Mr. Johnson, I need this job. You don't understand. I was just trying to protect the business. I didn't mean any harm." "I didn't know who you were," but Marcus stood unmoved. His eyes didn't waver, his tone didn't soften. "That's the point, Rick. You didn't know who I was. And yet you judged me. You assumed the worst of me. You weren't protecting the business, you were destroying its reputation. Do you realize how many customers you've turned away with that same arrogance? How many people walked out of this place humiliated? That ends today. I won't allow it to continue." Rick's lips quivered. He looked around the room, hoping for someone to speak up for him, but no one did. The very employees he had belittled and intimidated for years stared back at him with cold, unreadable faces. Not one person came to his defense. Marcus nodded toward the security guards who had been standing by the door. "Escort him out, please," Rick's voice cracked. "Wait, no, please, give me another chance. I'll do better, I swear." His pleas grew louder, almost pathetic, as the guards walked him toward the door. His once proud stride was gone, replaced by stumbling steps of defeat. The door closed behind him with a sharp thud. The room exhaled all at once, as if everyone had been holding their breath. Then, softly at first, a few employees began clapping. Others joined in until the room filled with quiet but genuine applause. For the first time in years, they felt relief. Someone had finally stood up to Rick's cruelty. Marcus raised his hand gently, signaling for the room to quiet down. "Thank you," he said. But this is not about celebrating someone's downfall. It's about learning a lesson. This dealership will no longer be a place where people feel judged, looked down on, or unwanted. It will be a place of respect for customers and for employees alike. Over the next few weeks, Marcus set out to transform the dealership. He didn't just change policies, he changed the culture. He held training sessions for the staff, teaching them that every person who walked in was to be treated with dignity, whether they were wearing a tailored suit or old work clothes. He encouraged employees to listen, to smile, to make people feel valued. He also reached beyond the walls of the dealership. Marcus created opportunities for young people in the community to intern and learn about the car industry. He gave chances to kids who had been told they'd never succeed because he knew exactly how that felt. His message was simple: success isn't just about selling cars. It's about lifting people up. Slowly, word began to spread. Customers noticed the difference. Families who had once felt ignored now returned, telling their friends and neighbors about the warm service they experienced. The dealership became known not just for luxury cars, but for kindness, fairness, and honesty. One afternoon, a middle-aged man walked into the showroom wearing worn-out boots and a faded jacket. In the past, someone like him would have been dismissed immediately. But now, a young salesman greeted him with a smile, offered him coffee, and asked what he needed. To everyone's surprise, the man ended up buying one of the most expensive SUVs on the lot. "Nobody ever treated me with respect in a place like this before," he said. "That's why I chose to spend my money here." Moments like that proved Marcus was right. Respect cost nothing, but it could change everything. As for Marcus himself, he didn't let anger define him. He could have held on to bitterness for the way he had been treated. He could have used his position to humiliate Rick in front of everyone. But instead, he chose to turn his painful experience into a powerful lesson for his employees, for the community, and even for himself. One evening, as Marcus locked up the dealership, he stood for a moment looking at the shiny cars under the showroom lights. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the struggles, the insults, the times people told him he didn't belong. And now, here he was, owning the very place where someone had tried to make him feel small. He smiled softly to himself. This wasn't just about cars, it was about respect. It was about changing the way people saw each other. And in that moment, Marcus knew he had built something far greater than a dealership. He had built a legacy. This story reminds us that respect is free, and kindness goes further than arrogance ever will. The world changes when we treat people with dignity, because the person you look down on today might just be the one who changes your life tomorrow.